In
we
this
look at the immune
episode,
system, and something that at least I did not learn in medical school was that 70% of our immune cells are actually located in and around the gut, which I guess if you take a step back should not be surprising, because the first role of the immune system is to recognize self from non-self. And where do you come into contact with non-self? The most common place is through the food we eat, the beverages we drink. One of the teachings, and this comes out of the work done in this scientific initiative called the American Gut Project, where this was an epidemiologic study that found that people who eat 30 different plants a week, at least 30 different plants, and here you can count orange twice. If you have it as a fruit, you have it in a salad and so on, you can count it. So, but those who eat 30 or more plants a week tend to have better gut diversity, better gut health. And for us who grew up in the pharmaceutical world of antibiotics, small molecules, chemotherapy, and so on, we learn very little about nutrition science. In fact, with no offense to my alma mater, we probably spend less than one afternoon talking about nutrition, right? And so we then become very poorly qualified to talk to our patients about food. And because we as doctors really don't like to look dumb in front of patients, so if we don't understand it, then we tend to be somewhat dismissive and say, oh, that's not important. Beyond a certain point, I really suspect that launching a startup is a leap of faith, and you can analyze to a certain point, and after that you just take that leap of faith and know that you will figure it out.
welcome to Gut Instinct. I'm Evan. Gut Instinct is a podcast series where we interview leading scientists, entrepreneurs, and professionals on issues such as gut health, the food and healthcare sector, wellness, following your energy, and having a balanced and holistic approach to life. The Gut Instinct series is sponsored by Wellsprout. In this episode, I'm very excited to have Dr. Jeremy Lim joining us. Dr. Jeremy Lim is the CEO and co-founder of AMILI, a microbiome insights company based in Singapore serving the region. Beyond this, he also undertakes academic and practice-focused work in health financing, and in his previous roles, Jeremy has spent substantial time in public and private healthcare across Asia, as well as in policy advisory with Singapore and other regional governments, the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, and the World Health Organization. He was founding partner in NYSE-listed Oliver Wyman's Asia Healthcare Consulting Practice. Other than AMILI, he also serves as adjunct faculty in the National University of Singapore and Monash University, Malaysia. Outside academia, Jeremy serves on the boards of various for-profit and not-for-profit organizations in different aspects of healthcare, including hospitals, migrant worker health, healthy longevity, and digital health interventions. He maintains an active interest in health advisory, supporting former clients, focusing mainly on healthcare acquisitions and health insurance. He trained in surgery and public health, attaining postgraduate qualifications in both the UK and USA. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jeremy. Could you tell us a little bit about how you started AMILI, given your background?
Okay, yeah. Well, firstly, I'll say upfront, I'm not a microbiome scientist, right? I was really led into the microbiome narrative and the entire adventure. And AMILI's journey really started in the year 2013, right, when my now co-founders did the first series of microbiome transplants when they were in the National University Hospital. Right, so that was in 2013, 2014. And if I can be very candid, microbiome science then was really very, very young. In fact, the term microbiome was only coined in the year 2001. Right, so we then challenged ourselves on how to accelerate this. And it was in that setting that they then came to approach me to ask, how do you think we could move this faster? Because the microbiome, it was clear to them that it was going to transform the way we think about health, the way we think about healthcare. And something that's very fundamental that really made me take this plunge was this realization that the microbiome is very, very deeply shaped by diet, lifestyle, and the environment. Therefore, what is done in North America and in Europe, great work definitely, but how relevant is it to us, particularly in rice-eating tropical Southeast Asia, right? And so it was with that conviction that we decided that we wanted to avail patients in Singapore and in the region of really microbiome transplants whenever suitable. And secondly, we wanted to build a very large data set of multi-ethnic Asia and use these insights to generate products as well as services to benefit people living in this part of the world. And that's really why we set up AMILI. And maybe little fun fact that the word AMILI is coined from 3 English words: Asia Microbiome Library. Yes, and that's a very nerdy professorial sort of thing. So yes.
No, I love it. It makes a lot of sense. And can you share a bit about, I understand AMILI has the largest microbiome bank of Southeast Asian microbiome data. How did you come about assembling that?
Well, we were very fortunate that all of us as founders also hold academic roles in various universities. And so with the university's support, we were able to hit the ground running in terms of we know who to talk to. Many of our colleagues across the academic systems in Singapore and around the region also had access to microbiome data sets that they very generously gave us access to. Right? We then, when we established our own microbiome donor program, this then, because we have to screen donors, right, to make sure that they are suitable, they don't have any infectious disease that may be inadvertently transmitted to patients. And in the process of building up the microbiome donor program, we found that we had amassed a very large data set of healthy Singapore residents, right? And through all these different pieces, we then managed to pool everything together into what we call the data lake, right, which is the consolidation of all the data we have on the microbiome and the associated metadata, like how the microbiome ties to an individual's mood, diet, and really so on and so forth.
And this is fascinating. I would love to dig a bit deeper into some of these threads you've alluded to. Why the focus on the Southeast Asian microbiome? How did you come up with this positioning for AMILI?
Well, the very elegant work done by the Wyman Institute in Israel showed that the microbiome was predominantly driven by diet, lifestyle, and the environment. We also know that from a who is their point of view, that the microbes in Asia are very different from the microbes that you find in North America, Europe, right? And so we just put 2 and 2 together and said that if we in Asia don't do our own research, our own discovery, we don't create our own data sets, then it's almost like taking a Californian growth chart for infants and for young children, bringing it to Cambodia or to Cameroon and saying, guys, use this, right? So we really wanted to establish what is that reference range for really Asia, particularly multi-ethnic Asia, and then we go from there, because the pathologies, the health benefits of specific products and so on may be very different.
Makes a lot of sense. I'm quite curious then how you started your entrepreneurial journey. If you could share a bit about, I guess, the previous experiences you had and what led you to making the switch to go into entrepreneurship.
Well, I would say I've always been interested in how to make things better. And I guess that's where healthcare is very satisfying, because it's so broken that there are many areas that you can make things better.
That's a whole other thread we'll need to dive into.
Strive. So I would say that even when I was in large organizations, the government and really so on, the intrinsic drive was always to figure out, are there better ways of doing things? And I guess that for health, at its core, we all want only 3 things, right? We want high quality healthcare that is affordable and that is accessible, right? And so there's a lot of opportunity to learn from each other. And so my own entrepreneurial journey really began when I started going around the world studying how other people do things, and you just realize that there's so many ways to do things better, and then figure out what is the path to getting to yes. Because one of the good things about the healthcare sector is that there are no bad people. Nobody wakes up saying, who am I going to kill today? Right? That's not how healthcare works. But because we see the world through different lenses, we take different perspectives, a lot of my own entrepreneurship journey that some have described as policy, practice entrepreneurship rather than business has probably been 20 years in the making, right? Then when I moved out of large organizations, I then wrote my book on the Singapore healthcare system. That was a bit of my year as a social activist, but story for another day. And after that, I set up my own little consulting firm that then folded into the Oliver Wyman practice, and that's how I then became the founding partner for the Oliver Wyman healthcare practice, right? So, and then when the microbiome opportunity came along, I was actually already stepping back. I had retired from really management consulting. I was planning just to lead a relatively quiet life. But again, when you look at this and say, wow, as I read through the academic papers, talk to people, I say, wow, that my now co-founders are absolutely right. This is going to transform even very basic paradigms. I can talk about that later. I said, wow, right, we got to do something about this. And that's how AMILI was born, and that's how I then came to be one of the co-founders as well as CEO.
Wow, so quite a switch going from retiring from management consulting, thinking you're going to take it easy, to going into the entrepreneurship startup world.
That game plan didn't quite work out. So, yes.
And I guess I would like to understand a bit about your interest in gut health and how that first started.
Okay.
Could you share a bit about perhaps when you first encountered how important the gut health is, and then what made you decide to go deeper into pursuing this now as your startup?
No, Evan, that's a great question. And for many doctors who are of my vintage, we went to medical school 30 years ago. There was very little known about the microbes that were in our gut. And that was, in my time, we called them commensals, right? And pretty much, as the Chinese saying goes, 丁水不犯河水. We don't disturb them, and they don't disturb us. So we just thought that we had this comfortable relationship where each side doesn't bother each other, and the microbes were involved in a bit of vitamin metabolism, a bit of digestion, but that was about it. And of course, now we know that we're totally wrong, right? With advances in sequencing, with advances in really compute power, we suddenly, the whole universe of the microbiome opens up. And probably the right way to think about the microbiome is that the 60-70 trillion microbes that are in our gut are really little biological factories, right? And if we provide the right input from a very industrial point of view, the right input into these factories produces the right output. And this output is in the form of, the technical term would be metabolites, molecules that then cross the intestinal lining into the blood circulation. And from there, it affects your brain health, immune function, metabolism, and really so on and so forth. So with that very basic paradigm of really appreciating these 60 trillion microbes, suddenly the microbiome becomes easy to understand from a conceptual point of view, but incredibly hard to decipher fully and to translate into actionable insights, because these microbes interact with each other, right? And food is far more complicated than really pharmaceuticals. The banana you eat on day 1 is very different from the banana on day 10. The mango, depending on the degree of ripeness, can be a savory, it can be a dessert. Think of mango salad, think of mango sticky rice in Thailand. And it's very clear that the input is very heterogeneous. The microbes interact with each other, right? Because they live in an ecological system, and the molecules that they produce also interact with each other. Some of these molecules may be substrates for other microbes to work on, right? And the effects of the microbiome or these metabolites also in part is driven by the host phenotype, meaning us as human beings. So once you put all this together, it's really, really challenging. And for us in the microbiome world, and in AMILI specifically, we were very, very fortunate that as we collected a lot of data, which was our starting point because we are just doctors. We don't really know about AI and all this, but we know how to collect a lot of very high quality data, right? And I would say we just got very lucky that the large language models started to really erupt into the public consciousness. It became much easier to use, and hence, with all the data we had coupled with the tools that have become very easy to use, we're now able to generate the insights that then power products as well as services.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
So it sounds like it was I guess, interplay of a lot of different forces and the timing of things that somehow made it all exciting and possible.
I think the layman term is luck.
Though, on that note, when you mentioned your vintage and doctors of your
Yes.
vintage, I'm curious to try to understand a bit more about perhaps what would you say doctors from perhaps that time might not understand about the importance of gut health and the microbiome that perhaps wasn't actually captured in the literature or the education at the time?
I mean, I think there are probably two very big aspects. One is that when we look at microbial science, the reductionist paradigm that Western allopathic medicine was born out of antibiotics, right? There is a microbe, there is a pathogen, there is an antibiotic, and there's almost a one-to-one relationship. So, and because that was the genesis of Western medicine, we are trained to be skeptical when we talk about multifactorial. There are multiple things that affect them, because that's how we have been trained, right? And that's why in the pharmaceutical world, it's very common to hear this term. What is the API? The active pharmaceutical ingredient. And in microbiome science, we're really talking ecology, right? It's about how complex adaptive systems govern themselves, and when we introduce a stimulus or something into the ecosystem, there are first order effects, second order, and the third order that are not easy to really intuitively understand. And so the first paradigm that older doctors need to understand is that reductionist is not useful lens to look at the microbiome world. We've got to look at it through an ecological lens. Then the second big paradigm then is around food as medicine, right? And for us who grew up in the pharmaceutical world of antibiotics, small molecules, chemotherapy, and so on, we learn very little about nutrition science. In fact, with no offense to my alma mater, we probably spend less than one afternoon talking about nutrition, right? And so we then become very poorly qualified to talk to our patients about food. And because we as doctors really don't like to look dumb in front of patients, so if we don't understand it, then we tend to be somewhat dismissive and say, oh, that's not important. And really, Evan, I cannot begin to tell you how many patients will cold call me to say that they've seen a doctor, they've spoken about how they've tried to broach the topic of how the foods they eat may affect their immune system, and can we tailor certain foods so they can reduce their dosage of steroids or immunomodulators, and the doctors tell them rubbish, totally doesn't work. And that's also why the world of Western medicine doesn't sit comfortably with traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, because these schools of thought really emphasize a lot on food and emphasize a lot on balance, right? Which are not really themes that are in the forefront of Western medicine. So there's a lot of unlearning, there's a lot of relearning that's needed by us older doctors to truly grasp and to appreciate microbiome applications.
This is exactly why I'm so excited that I have the chance to speak to you today, because you're the perfect person to help address some of these questions that
please
I think
go
a lot
ahead.
of the audience might have as well. So on that topic, say for example, of traditional Chinese medicine and some of these schools of thought that perhaps had less science backing behind it, and maybe the science is only now starting to catch up. From a scientific point of view, how would you, when you talk about food as medicine, so on one hand, I think there's a lot of skepticism around that, and people might not be very aware of the emerging science around how that actually informs the health of the body and wellness overall. But also at the same time, there are so many competing voices that give perhaps misinformation as well, using those terms. How do you apply a scientific lens to try to pass through this?
Well, I think that's why even podcasts such as yours are important to really get the facts out and to provide credible sources of information that are appropriately referenced and really fact checked, so that viewers and listeners can be much more confident that yes, this is credible, this is authentic, and I can check for myself.
Exactly.
Right. And I guess can I go to the first point that you made around
Please.
how our forefathers did not have the science? I mean, let's look at say the traditional Chinese banquet, right? Have you wondered why the carbohydrates, the rice, the noodles, are served last, and then dessert is right at the end, right? And we now know today, with easy access to continuous glucose monitors and really so on, that if we eat carbohydrates first, it causes a blood sugar spike that then sets off the insulin cascades and really so on, which are not great for overall health. So a lot of scientists and clinicians now advocate that when we eat, we should really almost prime the metabolic system with fiber, with vegetables, with some protein, maybe even a bit of polyunsaturated fat. Then after that, then only do the carbohydrates come, particularly the refined carbs, right? And you then think back that our forefathers had no sense of molecules or even carbohydrates or
Glucose
or
monitoring.
proteins, but they were phenomenal at observing. And so the Chinese banquet then just evolved to provide you with the carbohydrates right at the end, when the blood sugar spikes would be the most modulated because of all the foods that we have eaten previously. And here, maybe I think you'll be familiar that in Singapore, we a couple of years ago had a campaign to highlight the dangers of white rice and how white rice spikes your blood sugar and so on. And if you think about it, taken in isolation, it's perfectly true that white rice spikes your blood sugar. But how many of us eat white rice alone? Right? And in fact, Singapore's own National Research Agency, A*STAR, has done studies to show that when we eat white rice, the way that we eat it in real life with meat, with vegetables and so on, that the blood sugar spike is very, very much blunted. Right? And this then ties back to my earlier point around this reductionist approach. Right? If we say white rice is bad, alone it's not great, but taken together, it's much less harmful. And of course, white rice really tastes good. And that's why people have been eating this for 5,000 years.
Okay, great. So I can still continue eating my white rice.
Yes, but the sequence matters.
Absolutely. Yes. And I would like to dive in a bit more into that contrast you just gave of the reductionist framework versus the ecology sort of framework to sort of see it as a totality. On this podcast, we do focus a lot on how to create some sort of actionable ways of applying some of this information that we discuss on the podcast. What would you say would be a shift that can happen to move from a reductionist way of approaching things to a ecological way of seeing it as a system?
Well, I think two things. One is that our own mindsets will have to shift, and we doctors and other healthcare professionals, we will get the education, but when enough patients ask us about it, right, that's another stimulus to then trigger change. And thankfully, most of us in healthcare are reasonably bright. If we take the trouble to read, to inform ourselves, we will come to the same conclusions. So I think that the mindset piece is really, it is an important one. And the second piece is really around using technology. One of the reasons I would suspect why we embrace the reductionist approach was that it's easier to understand. I mean, you look at how we think about many things in life. We say, what are the critical success factors? What is your checklist?
Yes.
But we know in the real world, our critical success factors, if we take a business analogy, right? Money, expertise, and others, they have to come together in the right sequence, right? There is no point having expertise and spending a lot of money on them. You don't have the resources to then do something with them. And that's why one of the satisfactions of growing a successful business is to get the ingredients in at the right time, in the right sequence, right? And so technology today allows us to be much more on top of this, and that's why in so many fields this notion of a digital twin, it has become popular, right? And so for us also within AMILI, we are really building out the equivalent of a wellness or a metabolic digital twin, so that when you eat specific foods in specific sequences, we can then predict that this is what you should eat and why, and in what sequence. And I think that for us as healthcare professionals and for the layman also, trusting that the technology works, trusting that if our mindset shift, we can open the opportunities to all this, that can be very meaningful, very, very powerful. And maybe just to end off on this, on what this point, that our response to the same foods can be very individualized, can be very different, right? And in fact, we have a peer company in the UK that's called Zoe, and Zoe essentially scores foods differently depending on the individual. And the genesis story of Zoe is worth spending a little bit of time. Professor Tim Spector is one of the leading researchers in genetics, and particularly for his work on the study of identical twins. And identical twins are genetically exactly the same. But he was noticing that identical twins have a very different metabolic response. They eat the same foods, and twin 1, the blood sugar goes like that, twin 2, the blood sugar goes like this. And he started to ask himself, what is it? If it's not the genes, it's got to be the epigenetics or the factors around the genes. And this then led him to the discovery of the microbiome, and how the microbiome is such a seminal player in how our bodies respond differently to different foods.
Wow, I think that's such a fascinating context that you just shared about how it can be so individual. And that train of thought then, so given again there's so much information out there about what people should be doing for their health, but yet there's this individual aspect. I guess that's where, like you mentioned, the technology becomes essential. Could you share a bit more about, say, how AMILI and yourself, how do you think about technology, and how do you think about that piece of the fact that it can be so individualized, people's responses to different foods?
I think much as I'm an advocate of a personalized approach, these personalized approaches are built on fundamentals. Like, by and large, saturated fat in large quantities is not great for you. Right? Ultra processed foods, meaning that they're designed to be hyper palatable, they've got the fiber taken out, they've got chemicals put in, generally they're not good for you. So there is a foundation of, I would say, almost universal truths that we should work upon. And the example that I gave around the sequencing of the food, for most people they will respond similarly, right? But on the back of that, if we want to then go deeper, that's when the really diagnostics become very useful. And what AMILI's rolling out is a program that's called AMILI Optimize, that in the fully stacked version has a microbiome test, has a continuous glucose monitor, food photo logging, and regular questions to the individual over a short period of time on how you're feeling, what did the food do for you, and really so on. And it ingests all the data from your wearables and so on. And with all these data components, we can then build out predictive models to then say, Evan, you should eat certain foods, and these are the best times to eat them for your metabolic type. right? And the list goes on and on. And we're extending this into not just food, but also lifestyle, sleep, and really so on. Because as the saying goes, you cannot outrun a bad diet, right? But at the same time, an impeccable diet with no exercise and 3 hours of sleep is not going to do you any good. So something that I forgot to update on my CV was that last year I did the board exams in lifestyle medicine, right? And I will give the Cliff Notes super condensed version, but essentially lifestyle medicine teaches that there are 6 domains to health, right? Diet, activity, sleep, stress, social connections, and avoidance of high-risk behaviors like alcohol, binge drinking, tobacco, and really so on. And if you talk to my good friend, Professor Michelle Polan, who coined the term blue zones, Michelle adds a 7th, which is purpose in life, right?
Fantastic.
And quite interestingly, these are, you can't overweight on diet and underweight on activity and say, because I'm eating well, I can cut back on my sleep.
Yep.
So maybe the way that I explain it to my patients is that there is a house of health. It doesn't matter whether the front door is diet, the front door is sleep, it might be exercise, it doesn't matter what the front door is, but if you want to benefit fully in the house of health, you have to go from whichever was the front door, from the sleep room to the diet room to the exercise room to the stress room, and you have to walk through all of these rooms, otherwise your health will be very incomplete. Right? And so for us, while we start off, and AMILI's starting point is good health starts with gut health, but we also recognize that we have to address the other rooms in the house of health. Otherwise, we might do great work for your microbiome, for your diet, but if the rest of you is not benefiting because you're not sleeping enough, you're not exercising in the right way, then really, what is the point?
Makes perfect sense. To take it back to the entrepreneurship piece that we were discussing earlier, I'm curious to understand a bit more for the people in the audience who are entrepreneurially inclined. Could you share more about the dynamics you have with your co-founders and how you came to be working together with them?
Firstly, I would say that I've done many things in my life. A startup is far and away the hardest. So for those of you who are thinking about doing a startup, go smack yourself a few times, then look in the mirror again, and only if you really, really, really want to do it after that cooling off period and all, then really, then go for it. Because really, I've cared for patients, I've run consulting, I've been CEO of really hospitals, and a startup is far and away the hardest for really a couple of reasons. One, you're doing things that haven't been done before. Right? If you're doing something that's been done before, you're not really a startup. Secondly, startups, unlike the large organizations, you work without a safety harness. Right? The day you start, the day you're thinking about runway, right? You're thinking, oh man, I have to choose, I have to make difficult choices right from day one. And it's almost like going on a trapeze, on a tightrope, juggling 15 balls at the same time. Whereas, like when you're in a large company, like anyone who's ever worked in government has never had to worry about cash flow. You never worry about payroll, right? So by in a startup, you got to figure out all of these. And I would say that you also need to figure out two things on the manpower, on the talent aspects. One, you're absolutely right. What is the mix of co-founders that really makes sense, right? And here, I would say nobody gets it right? And that's also why it's not unusual to find startups that have a co-founder suddenly appear 1.5 years later, because through the journey, the starting group of founders have realized that they're short of someone in technology, someone in data science, or really what have you, and so they complete the team by bringing in a co-founder later on. Right? So I think getting that configuration or that constellation right is very important, but don't beat yourself hard if you don't get it right, because you can always bring a co-founder later. Right? The second challenge that I found is that in a startup, the missing middle is one area that's hard to manage because the founding team tend and in healthcare they tend to be a bit more senior, and that's perfectly fine. Many of us are, I guess, financially comfortable in the sense that we have partners who are very stable or we have got some savings. Therefore, we can devote ourselves to this. We can take some risk. Then at the other extreme, there are the fresh graduates who have very little opportunity cost, and they really want to learn, and there's no better way to learn than to go on that accelerated journey with a fast-paced startup.
Yes.
But the difficulty then comes in the middle management, because this is the age where, and particularly here in Singapore, people are paying the mortgage on their BTOs. They've got young children. They're looking and saying, wow, I have to get a certain pay, and there's only that much risk that I can take, right? So what this then means is that unlike, say, in many professional services organizations, like in consulting, you have the senior partner, the junior partner, the principal, the engagement manager, the analyst, and all you have. In a startup, you have the senior guys and you have the very, very junior guys, right? So is it the most efficient way to organize? The answer is frankly no, but that's the reality of just the nature of being a startup when you're very cash crunch, and also folks in certain stages of their professional and personal journeys just cannot take the sort of risk that is innate to any startup.
On that note, I'm quite curious to understand a bit about your approach towards finding talent for the startup, because given exactly this topic you just raised, that finding perhaps the middle talent could be challenging, and given different life circumstances that people might have, they might not be so inclined.
Yes.
How do you approach this challenge?
With great difficulty. I don't think we have cracked it, to be honest. What I'm quite proud of within AMILI is that we're now 6 years old. We have brought in folks who were our interns when we first started, and they're now the managers, they're the middle management with us. So I would say that we have to grow our own timber. That is a given. And when it works well, it can be incredibly gratifying. At the same time, we gotta work very hard to find the right team, right? And honestly, I would say from my experience and when I talk to fellow founders, far more often we get it wrong than we get it right, because and it's not anyone's fault, right? If you're a middle manager in a large organization, you can read all you want about what startup life is, but until you immerse, you don't understand just how challenging or how difficult it is, and the anxiety, the stress, and the uncertainty often just not congruent with where that individual is at that particular stage of life. Yeah.
As a person that went through a startup experience, I can definitely relate to some of these points you're bringing up and the challenges the team faces. I'm curious now to understand a bit more about, say, for the people in the audience who are entrepreneurially inclined, your experiences with fundraising, and how would you advise other entrepreneurs to think about, how should we think about fundraising when it comes to a startup?
I think the first thing is that we'll have to think a lot about fundraising, because as we alluded to earlier, cash and runway are probably the most important things that founders need to worry about. And particularly in the last couple of years where the fundraising climate has been exceptionally challenging. And I guess where we're recording now in April 2026, where there's so much geopolitical really uncertainty, it's just very, very challenging. I would say that to find your prince, you have to kiss a lot of frogs. So you just have to go out there and meet a lot of people, and be pretty comfortable with rejections, be pretty comfortable with rejecting also. Because at the end of the day, a fundraise is really about matching. right? And the more experienced founders would also know that specific funds may focus in certain areas. They may be at a certain stage in their fund life that may just not be congruent with what a startup needs, right? So we got to be pretty clear-eyed about yes, it is challenging, but at the same time, even while it is challenging, you have to marry well, right? You got to marry the right funders that are aligned to your values, to what you want to do over the time horizon, right? And then you got to figure out all these second order issues. You take money from these guys, how does this play out to your next round, and really so on. And beyond a certain point, I really suspect that launching a startup is a leap of faith, and you can analyze to a certain point, and after that you just take that leap of faith and know that you will figure it out, right? And maybe just one small point about fundraising is that during the seed round, like I invest in a number of startups also. I look at the team, I look at the sector, because from experience, almost everyone's going in high hypothesis is wrong, right? Then how this relates to fundraising is you got to raise enough money to be able to pivot when you know that you're wrong, because there's no point being wrong and then dead, right? At least from the investor's point of view, the company ceases to exist. No point. But if you know that, but the more experienced investors will look and say, okay, it'll take you 60, 90 days to know that you're wrong. And at the 90-day mark, you'll still have enough money to pivot. I mean, pivot is a very polite way of saying that we were wrong and we still have enough money to change. Right? So, so when we raise also, if you think you need $3 million, raise more, because you're almost certainly going to be wrong.
Interesting. I remember having a chat once, and it was pointed out to me that it might be easier to get a divorce than it is to break up with an investor. So I thought it was quite funny. And yeah, it just really goes to show that choosing the right partners, investors, team is actually so key.
Yes. Yeah.
Could you share a bit more about perhaps what are some of the top priorities for AMILI at this moment, at this stage?
Well, we are in the growth stage now. So the most important things for us are customers, revenue, and to get that momentum, right? And in this fundraising climate, I would say the valuations are very, very second order. What's far more important is to have that growth capital, particularly for companies like us. Right? If I look back to 2019 and where we are today, the microbiome has become very hot. Right? There's no longer any uncertainty in the investors and in the community that the microbiome is going to transform medicine. The question then is how, and whether AMILI or any other company would be the ones that will play a big role in this and hence enjoy the financial upside. So for us, it's really the priority is to grow in terms of customers, geography, as well as and also revenue, right? And at the same time, I'm always on the lookout for the capital that aligns to our values, that helps us to grow in ways that will allow us to grow quickly, but also hold our heads high. Because what I tell my team also is that I would really want to attend my 50th medical school reunion without a paper bag over my head, right? And therefore, it's important to do well for your investors and for yourself, but it's important also to do good. And in the healthcare world, particularly when there's asymmetry of information, whereas the professionals, we know more than the lay public, there's a very high bar on what is appropriate behavior, right? And for us in AMILI, we do our best to live up to these standards.
Fantastic. I'm curious to get your thoughts then on what are perhaps looking forward to see how far the industry has come, but also that it's still a very exciting stage of growth. Where do you see the industry headed in the next 10 years? Where do you think gut health, the gut health science would be in about 10 years from now?
AMILI's tagline has always been good health starts with gut health. And I suspect that it was a tagline when we first started. I suspect this will become one of medicine's truisms. And I was in the Philippines last year, and I spoke at a conference, and it was very interesting. But every speaker before me, and I spoke in the afternoon, so the speakers in the morning kept pointing to me and saying, "Oh, later you must come and listen to Jeremy's talk." And their basic point was that if you don't optimize, you don't fix the gut, everything else won't work, right? Or they'll be so diluted in terms of its efficacy. So I think one of the big paradigms will be, whether it's in the field of immunology, oncology, cardiology, we really got to make sure that our gut health, our gut microbiome is in the best possible shape, and the interactions across brain health, metabolic health, and so on are starting to become very, very evident. So the field will move into the actionability more and more, right? And it's not going to be linear. We think about it, the human genome was finished 20 over years ago, I think 2003, and only now are we starting to see the field of pharmacogenomics start to really come up, where we look at an individual's genetic makeup and look at the drugs and how they interact. The field of pharmacomicrobiomics, or how the microbes interact with the drugs, there are already proof points that are emerging amongst those who know. Like, for example, statins. Depending on your type of microbiome, the effectiveness of statins to lower blood cholesterol and the intensity of the side effects are very dependent on the sort of microbiome you have. Right? But not many doctors know that. But over time, I think the next couple of years, more and more of these are going to come out, and they'll be easier to run it through some large language model to then say, this is the microbiome profile that we have. How should I adjust the dose of this medicine and of that medicine? I think the third big change is really going to be this recognition that food is a very fundamental pillar of how to optimize gut health, and through gut health manage the chronic inflammation that we now know to be so linked to really accelerated aging, to accelerated cardiovascular disease, and so on.
Fantastic. Well, lots of threads for us to pick up in the next half.
Please.
Now a word from our sponsor, Wellsprout. Wellsprout is a science-driven gut health-focused company providing gut health testing programs and analytics, as well as a 100% all-natural plant-based super greens powder, high in fiber and prebiotics with zero synthetic additives. Wellsprout Super Blend helps time-struck professionals care for their gut health and contains over 27 plant ingredients carefully selected and scientifically formulated to promote gut health and nurture a thriving gut microbiome. If you go to getwellsprout.com, that's GETwellsprout.com, you can claim the special offer of a free welcome kit and a 10% discount off any order with the promo code GUTInstinct. Full disclosure that I am a co-founder of Wellsprout, and my goal with the Gut Instinct podcast series is to raise awareness and bring relatable information on gut health and health-related issues and tools to the general public to bring our bodies and lives into greater alignment. Perhaps now to sort of go in a bit of a different direction, but maybe also to just close off something I thought was interesting from the first half, talking about the Southeast Asian microbiome. So from your experience, what would you say you've noticed are some of the key differences in the Southeast Asian microbiome compared to, say, some other data sets from maybe Europe and elsewhere?
Maybe let me just start. I mentioned the Wyman Institute from Israel earlier, and around its role of the diet and the environment. And interestingly, 15 years ago, National Geographic put out an article on why the Japanese eat so much seaweed. And in this article was a reference to a particular microbe that breaks down seaweed or nori very efficiently. And interestingly, 90% of Japanese have this microbe, but only 10% of people living in the US have this microbe. So whether the chicken or the egg came first is frankly a moot point, but it's pretty clear that our microbes, like all ecological systems, adapt in response to what we eat. Right? Because whenever every time we eat, we feed ourselves, we feed our microbes. And if I take us back to the question that you guys remember, we are rice-eating tropical people, right? And one other thing is that labor is relatively inexpensive in this part of the world. So if I look at us versus, say, a high-income temperate country, what we do have more Prevotella, which is a type of microbe that's very closely linked to rice eating, because it just helps you to metabolize the rice and its components much more efficiently. We find that we generally tend to have better microbiomes, and I suspect it's because we eat less ultra processed foods, and it's widely known that in many high income Western countries, more than half of the calories come from these ultra processed foods. So because I guess we are blessed in the tropics that we have fresh green leafy vegetables and so on and so forth the whole year round, and because labor is relatively inexpensive, we get freshly prepared foods, and all these collectively help to make for a healthier microbiome.
Interesting. On a similar note, you mentioned briefly the topic of blue zones earlier.
Yes.
What's your take on Singapore being a blue zone, and also
Okay.
how would gut health figure into this picture
Yes. Okay. When actually Michelle came to Singapore last year, I brought him to see Minister Ong, and Minister Ong had given a speech shortly after the Netflix documentary had put out that Singapore is the sixth blue zone. And I think it really, he articulated it very well that Singapore is not a blue zone. In fact, our habits are not particularly conducive to being a blue zone. The weather is too hot and humid. We don't walk as much as we should. Singapore's food tends to be relatively unhealthy, at least the popular hawker foods, right? But what Minister Ong very astutely highlighted was that when we know the ingredients or the drivers of a blue zone, we can then engineer. Right, and here you can see that in Singapore the climate is not that conducive for walking great distances. However, the government can engineer so that from the major bus stops or the bus terminals and the train stations, there are covered walkways to the most common places. So we can design the ecosystem to encourage mobility and movement. When it comes to food, we were really a manual laborer population. That was Singapore's genesis around the port, the coolies, and really so on. So a lot of our foods were high in carbohydrates because we needed a lot of energy. Now that we are much more sedentary compared to 200 years ago, but our taste buds have not evolved in the same way. So we then need to figure out how do we engineer food differently, and so that's why in previous years the government has also funded scientific work to figure out how do we make rice noodles in blends of white and brown rice, so that the texture, the flavor is still familiar enough, right? But the health effects are much more positive. So Singapore, by and large, honestly, we're not. The foods we eat are not great for gut health by and large, but they can be, because we have lots of fresh foods and fresh vegetables, fruits, and really so on, and a lot of it can be freshly prepared because labor is relatively inexpensive, and this is of course compared to many of the high income Western countries. So by and large, one of the teachings, and this comes out of the work done in this scientific initiative called the American Gut Project, where this was an epidemiologic study that found that people who eat 30 different plants a week at least 30 different plants. And here you can count orange twice. If you have it as a fruit, you have it in a salad and so on, you can count it. So, but those who eat 30 or more plants a week tend to have better gut diversity, better gut health.
Yes.
And honestly, if you go to a supermarket in, say, Nevada versus one you go to even down in Pasir Ris or whatever, you find that the variety is so much greater here, simply because we are in the tropics. So we have the innate capacity to have very good gut health. Where we probably need to do better would be to educate on limiting the ultra processed foods, having as much foods that's fresh and were freshly prepared, and don't go down the way of many other countries that have adopted this so-called sad standard American diet, right? Which is totally not the way to go, right? And as we look at the efforts here, I think the government's very serious about healthy living, healthier SG, and really so on. I think the specific mechanics, if we look at trying to inculcate healthy habits amongst the children, mandating healthy foods in schools, I think there'll be a bit of trial and error to get the formula right. But certainly, I'm pretty optimistic that if any country at the system level can lead the way, it would be Singapore.
I agree. And importantly, I guess, don't be sad, like you said. And on a similar note then, on longevity, what would your views be on how gut health impacts longevity, and what are your views on this whole rise of the longevity movement, perhaps?
Well, I think many in the longevity sector would be familiar with the term inflammaging, right? And it's a portmanteau of inflammation and aging. And we now know that many diseases linked to aging are really diseases of chronic inflammation, cardiovascular disease, the risk of dementia, and really so on. Then if we look at inflammation, what drives inflammation is really the immune system. Right? And that's why an overactive immune system, or if you have a chronic focus of infection like periodontal disease and so on, then your immune system is then hyperstimulated on a chronic basis. Right? And the immune system should be stimulated when you have an injury, when you have an infection. That's the appropriate physiological response. But when it's chronic, when it's sustained beyond what is useful for the human host, that's us, that's when we start off all of these inflammatory cascades that give rise to all these bad things. And then we look at the immune system, and something that at least I did not learn in medical school was that 70% of our immune cells are actually located in and around the gut, which I guess if you take a step back should not be surprising, because the first role of the immune system is to recognize self from non-self. And where do you come into contact with non-self? The most common place is through the food we eat, the beverages we drink. So it's totally unsurprising, if we think about it in this way, that our immune system should be intimately linked to our gut and the microbiome. And this also then allows us to be pretty clear that if we eat the right foods, we can really put ourselves on the right trajectory for healthy aging, for living to a ripe old age, and not only living in the sense of chronological age, but living in the sense that we have vibrant lives, we enjoy companionship, interesting things to do. And so I think that the diet piece is a very, very critical part, and that ties gut health to really healthy aging.
Yes. And you mentioned earlier as well about
Please.
how you had actually pursued the lifestyle medicine as well.
Yep.
How would you link that back in here then to this having the right kind of diet to support healthy aging? How about the other lifestyle components?
Let me just let me parrot out what the mantra of really lifestyle medicine as it is taught, and the College of Lifestyle Medicine is a strong proponent of of primarily plant-based diets. And here I would say that the data is very, very strong, that a predominantly plant-based diet is indeed better for health, right? I think meat in and of itself is not bad, at least not all kinds of meat, but I suspect that we have gone overboard, right? And that the meat, probably the best way to think about meat is that meat should be the condiment rather than the main course, right? But it's so common to see 300-gram steak, 2 or 3 sprigs of vegetables, a couple of deep fried French fries, and ta-da! This is a complete meal. I'm afraid it is not, right? So my own philosophy is that the best diet is the one you can sustain for your whole life, right? And that if we want diets to be sustainable, change has to be graduated. And all these kind of I'm gonna go plant-based from tomorrow, right? These are pretty challenging, right? And so what I advise to my own patients is also that this is what the science shows, but your body's gonna forgive you if you enjoy a nice steak every now and then. And don't be shy, you're paying a lot of money for the steak. Cut it up and share, right? Because eating a tomahawk steak by yourself is probably not a good idea, but sharing it with 6 other people, everyone can enjoy the flavor of a very nicely done steak, but you don't need to consume too much, right? And make sure that your carbs, your proteins and all predominantly come from plant-based sources. Then I think that would be really helpful and one of the critical steps for really healthy aging. The piece that in Singapore particularly I think we do terribly is sleep and stress, right? And it's still sadly very, very common to hear people say, I'll sleep when I'm dead, which is all well and good, but unfortunately chronic sleep deprivation is one of the biggest risk factors for dementia, right? So if you do not want to spend your last years in stages of cognitive impairment, and it's very difficult not just for the individual but for your loved ones around you, then sleep is absolutely critical. And that I suspect ties to stress. And Singapore, I think we all know the really statistics that we seem to relish living with stress. I think that's honestly quite dreadful. And for everyone who is a parent, I think a very sobering statistic is that the leading cause of death from both men and women under the age of 30 is suicide. So we are doing a terrible job in the mental health related aspects, and we just have to do better. And I suspect that the answer will not lie in the healthcare system. We are the what's the best way to put it? We are the gold-plated ambulance at the bottom of a cliff. Someone needs to go upstream to put the guardrails to make sure that people don't fall off the cliff, right? And that's the part that will require all of society to be much more proactive and recognizing we all as parents, as educators, as the system, we have our roles to play, and how do we pull everything together.
Exactly. I was having a conversation recently on that point, on how actually if you think about wellness, there's so many angles and dimensions to it, and diet is only one thing, and stress is an important one, but it really requires a very holistic approach to address these issues.
And they are actually related, because when we're stressed, we tend to indulge in comfort food. That is why they are called comfort food. And you binge drink when you've had some sort of stressful event and really so on. I mean, if you look at why do people fall off the wagon, whether it's alcohol, it's drugs and so on, it's because they are stressed and they haven't mastered the alternate coping mechanisms. So they then go back to whether it's tobacco, it's really alcohol, or really anything else.
Makes sense. So I'm curious now to get your thoughts, Jeremy, about perhaps, given the diversity of your experiences in all these various domains, where do you see the role of government and policy when it comes to addressing these issues? And also, what do you think the healthcare industry could be doing better to address some of these issues.
Okay, let me tackle the easier one first on what the healthcare industry should do. I think firstly, we should stop calling ourselves an industry. I think the money is important. Without a financial model that is viable, it's going to be very challenging to do anything. But I think we really have to reframe ourselves as a movement. And when we should not be in the business of healthcare, we should be in the business of health and health as a movement. Right? WHO has this policy approach that's described as health in all. It's really attractive from a conceptual point of view. From an operational point of view, it's incredibly challenging because you have to persuade so many different people. But I think that Singapore, we have the opportunity to do this. And what we in the health sector should do would be to join the dots to really showcase to policymakers in housing, in transport, that their roles are important. And I think that the COVID pandemic, if we have not learned the lessons around how important mental health is and how this pertains to greenery, space, social connectivity, and really so on. So we as the health sector, we should advocate and represent the science to the other sectors, even as we look after our own patients, we look after the downstream. And I think Singapore can do a good job on this if we really want to, because we are pretty coherent as a government. The health ministry works well with the transport ministry, with the urban renewal authority, and really so on. So I think I'm a bit more optimistic there, but we must want it badly enough, right? And in the hierarchy of things that are existential, like you have done military service, I've done military service, defense and security are existential. So nobody talks about how much is it going to cost. Water is existential. That's why we have Marina Barrage, we have new water and all, and nobody talks about how much is this going to cost us, right? If we put health into the similarly existential bucket, then I think a lot of the mindsets will then shift, and we'll be able to be very, very effective in what we do.
Very interesting. And on that note then, perhaps, what are some emerging areas and the research in gut health, or where it's headed to, that's exciting you now?
I think the use of AI to really pull the different pieces together is very exciting, and I think it will become mainstream soon enough. Because if we take an ecological lens to the microbiome and to human health more broadly, everything's related to everything else, and our human brains just cannot join all these dots together, but the machines can, right? And so if we can use technology to help us to see the linkages and to see the chain of causation, then we can reverse engineer, we can figure out what the right interventions at the right times are. And I think that can help us to move the needle very significantly on human health. We spoke a lot about gut health and food, and I think technology also allows us to know what foods are good for us, and we discussed Zoe earlier. But additionally, we can also nudge in real time. So you could imagine, under the AMILI optimized program that we are rolling out, let's say version 3, version 4, you are walking down Orchard Road, right, and you open the app and ask, what's for lunch? The app replies to you, Evan, based on your health profile and your health goals, these are the 4 different places that you could eat, and we have scanned the menus for you, and these are the 7 things that are optimal for you. Pick any one of them, and your insurer, whether it's AIA, Prudential, or whoever, will send you back a $1 cashback. Well, then Evan will look at it and say, I was planning to eat one of these anyway, and for $1, why not? And at the end of your meal, you're sitting down and enjoying a little cup of coffee, and you open your app again, and it tells you that, based on the meal you just ate. There's a YouTube video for 90 seconds that will tell you why this food that you ate is particularly good for you. At the end of watching this video, bing, you get 50 cents cash back, right? And you could imagine a very near future where technology, instead of addicting us to less desirable behaviors, can be used to habituate us to the healthy behaviors. And over time, they then become second nature, right? We reach out for the broccoli, we reach out for the cauliflower rather than the potato chips that are ultra processed, right? And if the scenario I just painted to you, all the different pieces already exist individually. The innovation in the scenario that I described is to pull them all together around the individual and to focus the intent on health promotion rather than on any other business.
I really like this tech vision that you sort of painted for us of what it could be and how technology can shift us in the right direction.
Well, we as AMILI hope to be part of these efforts to really onboard the big tech players, bring all the resource, all the talent they have to help all of us to live healthier and better lives.
Yes, here's hoping to us getting there.
Yeah.
A final question that we like to end with for our guests that come on this podcast. If there's a final word or phrase that stands out to you from the discussion that we've had that can bring all these different threads together, what would it be?
Well, it would have to be good health starts with gut health, right? And really, maybe I'll just share my own personal journey. And I've lost about maybe 11 kilograms in the last year. And it was really pretty simple. I looked at my gut microbiome and really optimized for what foods I should eat to make my gut microbes the best that it could be. I was also fortunate enough to have access to continuous glucose monitors, and so I could figure out what foods spike my blood sugar and in what sequence. Because I love porridge, okay, particularly the Tiong Bahru fish porridge, but unfortunately it spikes my blood sugar higher than anything else. But because I now know this, I know that if I want to eat porridge, like I love having porridge for breakfast, but I would start with a plate of vegetables. And then when I have the porridge after that, the blood sugar spike is very, very modest. And it's all these things that help to optimize my body from a metabolic point of view. And to be very honest, I wasn't consciously looking to lose weight. Right? It's just by improving the food you eat and the sequence and the logic behind it, the pounds just shed off very, very naturally.
Fantastic. Well, here's to good health and gut health.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Evan.
Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, leave a comment, and learn more about us at getwellsprout.com.